Here we have an iPhone SE that was released back in 2016 when it was housing similar internals of the iPhone 6s, but in the same chassis that was used for the iPhone 5 and the 5s. Now here we are in early 2019 looking at this phone after it has been discontinued for a few months now. Is it still a worthy device to be used in today's day and age? Well, we are going to discuss that in this video along with the specs that are packed within this little iPhone. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so looking on the outside of the iPhone SE, it resembles the same design that you would find on the iPhone 5 and the iPhone 5s. Me personally, I think that this resembles more of the iPhone 5s due to the fact that it has the Touch ID sensor, which is basically the fingerprint sensor from Apple at the time. And you definitely notice it by not only the home button looking different compared to the iPhone 5, but it also has that outer layer on the border of the home button, which is basically used for the fingerprint sensor as well. Looking at the front of the device on the screen, at the top you have your front-facing camera with the speaker that you normally hear out of when you put the phone up to your ear, along with the proximities and ambient light sensors. Of course, at the bottom you have the home button. Looking at the left side of the device, you have your vibrate switch, your volume up and volume down buttons. On the top, you have your sleep wake button. On the right side, you have your nano SIM tray for your nano SIM card. At the bottom of the device, you have your 3.5mm headphone jack with a microphone next to it, a lightning connector for when you need to charge your phone connected to your computer, a speaker right next to it, and on the back of the device, you have your rear-facing camera at the top with the microphone and the LED flash. This features Apple's Retina display, which is a 4-inch LCD multi-touch display with IPS technology that features a resolution of 1136 by 640 at 326 pixels per inch with a contrast ratio of 800 by 1. And it has an oleophobic coating. Looking at the rear-facing camera on what it features, it is packed with a 12 megapixel sensor with a 2.2 aperture. A 5-element lens on the outside, features 5 times digital zoom with live photos that also includes stabilization, basically captures the movement before and after the photo is taken, features local tone mapping, face detection, and the LED flash. It is what they call true tone flash. Has a sapphire crystal lens cover with backside illumination, hybrid IR filter, has both auto and tap to focus with focus pixels. You have the ability to control the exposure, 4K video recording at 30 frames per second, 1080p HD video recording at either 30 or 60 frames per second, 720p HD video recording at 30 frames per second with 3 times digital zoom, cinematic video stabilization at either 1080p and 720p, continuous autofocus video, face detection, noise reduction, slow-mo video support for 1080p at 120 frames per second and 720p at 240 frames per second, time-lapse video with stabilization. It can also take 8 megapixel still photos while you're recording in 4K. And then of course you have the ability for playback zoom and video geotagging. Now if we look at the front-facing camera, this is what Apple calls the FaceTime HD camera. It features a 1.2 megapixel sensor, a 2.4 aperture, features retina flash so that way you are able to take pictures with the front-facing camera but also use flash even though it is physically not built into the camera itself on the front or behind the screen panel. It has the ability to record in 720p HD video, auto HDR for photos. Then of course it has some of the similar features that you would find within the rear-facing camera: backside illumination sensor, face detection, burst mode, exposure control, timer mode, and that's pretty much the camera right there. Now you do have the option to get this in 4 different colors. When the iPhone SE was released at the time, you either got silver, gold, space gray, or rose gold. Now the processor that is built into this device, it features Apple's A9 chip with a 64-bit architecture, and it has an embedded M9 motion co-processor. Features Bluetooth 4.2, and this particular model that I have holding in my hand, it came with iOS 11.4.1 pre-installed. Now, as far as battery life, Apple was claiming at the time you get up to 14 hours on 3G talk time. Internet use, you get up to 12 hours on 3G, 13 hours on LTE, and 13 hours on Wi-Fi. Video playback up to 13 hours, audio playback up to 50 hours, and standby time up to 10 days. Pricing at the time when this iPhone SE was first launched back in 2016, you had two models to choose from, a 16GB model at $399 and a 64GB model at $499. Now, early in 2017, Apple decided to double the storage on each model and kept the prices the same, which at the time it was $399 for a 32GB model and $499 for a 128GB model. Okay, so let's get down to if this phone is still worth being used this year in 2019, despite the fact that it's been discontinued now. I want to say not too long, maybe a few months, because at the end of 2018 is when they've discontinued this particular iPhone. What was my main reasoning for getting this iPhone after it had just been discontinued? Well, the main reason is because I was looking for a device that I essentially wanted to use as an iPod Touch, basically. For those of you guys who have followed me for a while, you'll know that I have an iPod Touch 5th generation, which I actually have over here still in my possession, that I use once a while, but the battery is just not great on this as it keeps getting more updates. That's what I pretty much experience on every single iPod. I do feel like the batteries within the iPhones are a little bit stronger. Plus, if I were to get the iPod Touch 6th generation, it's basically going to have internals that are still slightly kind of outdated, whereas the iPhone SE is not too bad since it has the same internals that is found in the iPhone 6s, or I should say for the most part. However, as it gets more updates throughout the years, the iPhone SE will be able to handle those updates without issues whatsoever, whereas the iPods, I feel like they get a little bit weaker faster when they get the newer versions out there. And plus, due to the size of the iPhone SE, I feel like it's more manageable than something as thin as the iPod Touch 5th generation. And like I said before, I'm basically just using this as my personal iPod Touch for not only music, but also for fitness as well. Now, how did I obtain this phone? Well, I got this off of Amazon for about 220 bucks. As you can see, I got it for that kind of a price, and I was able to get it brand new, although there were some slight notices that I've discovered, but that will be discussed in a different video. Now that we got out the reason why I decided to get the iPhone SE, let's go ahead and talk about who this phone is for. This phone is basically for people who desire the need of a smaller phone and do not want to be carrying something like this over here. As you can see, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 is a big phone, a phablet that people would call, and this has a 6.3 inch screen, 6.2, 6.3, it's around that range, whereas the iPhone SE right here, it features a 4-inch screen. Here's my opinion. To use as a daily phone, I honestly think that this screen is a little bit too small. However, if you're just using it as an iPod Touch, using it for your fitness workout, just to have for music, this is a perfect size for that particular situation. However, everyone has a different need on why they want to have a smaller phone. For some people out there, they desire to have a smaller phone no matter what, because they don't need a screen this big. They don't need something to be this big. Some people's hands, they just can't accommodate the size of a big phone. Here's the problem. Apple has started making bigger phones since the iPhone 6, which was back in 2014. When they released the iPhone 6, it was having a screen of 4.7 inches. That's not a bad size for an iPhone. However, you still have some people out there who desire phones that are even smaller than the size of the current iPhone 8 and iPhone 7 models. They're currently still selling by Apple, while those screens are at 4.7 inches, which is only a 0.7 inch increase of the screen size going from the iPhone 5S and the SE. Some people still prefer phones that are much smaller than that. Me personally, I think that the size of the iPhone SE to use as a daily phone is a little bit too small to my liking. I think that the iPhone 8, the non-Plus model, is a good size for those that don't want to have an overly huge phone. And then of course you do have the Plus models out there, or with the iPhone XS, the Max model, if anyone ever desires the need to have an even larger iPhone. Now, if you thought this was small, wait until you go back onto some of the older iPhones, like the iPhone 4 here, for example, this is at a 3.5-inch screen, and this is way too small in my opinion. So for those that still desire iPhones that are a lot smaller than what's currently out there with the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8 by Apple, this I think is small enough for those that want to have an even smaller iPhone. And it kind of makes me question about the future of the iPhones in 2019. There's been rumors and talk about an iPhone SE 2 possibly coming out, and that it may replicate a similar design that you would find in the iPhone XS, but possibly in a smaller package, maybe about the same size as the iPhone SE over here, with the ability to have that edge-to-edge screen, so that way it cuts out the home button and they basically add the notch at the top. I will say, if Apple is able to do that with the iPhone SE 2, if they do have a desire to release that phone, that might be beneficial for those that are wanting to get into the iPhone market, but on a smaller scale. Me personally, let's say if Apple were to integrate an iPhone XS design in this exact physical chassis right here. So as you can see how small it is compared to, let's bring out the iPhone 4 again. As you can see, the iPhone 4 is a lot smaller compared to the iPhone SE, although it does look a little bit bigger due to my case on it. That might be a big benefit for Apple, like I said. That way, they still have customers going into the iPhone market, but on a cheaper device that is not so overly cost, or I shouldn't say overly cost, that has a very hefty price point like you would find on Apple's main flagships right now. The iPhone XS, the iPhone XR, and the iPhone XS Max. Due to those phones being close or over up to $1,000 combined, not everyone is going to be purchasing those phones on a day-to-day basis. They may not even upgrade until maybe like 3 years from their initial purchase of whatever phone they bought last year. Now, the unfortunate part is the iPhone SE at the time, it didn't stay too long in the market. I guess due to the sales of it, it didn't really convince Apple to keep it on the market long enough. Although there was a story going around that Apple actually started reselling the phones again at a much cheaper price at $250, I think, just to see how people would react when they saw the iPhone SE back up online for sale. Apparently those have been sold out pretty fast, and that might be an indication to Apple that, okay, we should really consider releasing an iPhone SE 2, so that way not only is the iPhone more affordable, but it can also accommodate those that want a smaller phone again. Now, in my personal preference, like I said before, if it's going to be this size right here, that's a little too small to my liking. Maybe the edge-to-edge screen might change my opinion on that. However, I can see it bringing new customers on, so that way when they switch from like Android or whatever smartphone they're currently using to an iPhone, that they're not paying a huge price point. But then again, Apple is not the only one to be charging their products at this kind of price point. So are other manufacturers. It just happens to look like Apple is the main target, since they're such an easy target for criticism in my opinion. But that doesn't mean that they're the only ones getting the criticism. It's also other manufacturers. It just happens to be a lot more noticeable with Apple, unfortunately. However, whatever Apple does with their product lineup, manufacturers will most likely either consider or maybe proceed as well with their own different style to it. Overall, the iPhone SE is still a usable device in 2019, depending on when you bought it. Because here's the thing, some people I know, they've had an iPhone 5S for like 4 or 5 years because all they wanted on a phone was for texting, calling, and internet. That's it. So basically, those particular users weren't so interested in some of the new features that are coming out there, since all they want is just the general basics. And that's why the iPhone 5S at the time was a perfect size. And the iPhone SE was meant to not only house similar internals that was found in the newer iPhone at the time, which in that case it was the iPhone 6S, it was also to get those who were using some of the older devices like the iPhone 5 and 5S to also use one of their newer products, but keep their preferences and their desires the same. So if you are still using an iPhone SE in 2019, do not be ashamed of it, because it is still a great device to use at this time period. Even though it's been discontinued, it's still a great device to use. Me personally, like I said before, I wouldn't use this on a day-to-day basis as my main phone due to its size. However, it is still usable, and it's actually a classic looking design as well, because sometimes I do miss the block design. And honestly, I wish that Apple would have done like the iPhone SE 2 maybe a little bit earlier instead of the iPhone XR, because obviously it's not the cheapest iPhone in the lineup currently, as that is the iPhone 7, since Apple's still selling that phone. But for those that do want to get into like the newer flagship phones, I'm not 100% sure if the iPhone XR was such a great idea, especially at its pretty hefty price point. I'm thinking they should have done like a phone that was similar to the iPhone XS and XS Max, but maybe on a much smaller scale to cut down the cost a little bit. Because with the iPhone XR being not only a little bit bigger of the XS Max and being cheaper than the regular size XS Max, it just didn't seem like a very cheap alternative just for the newer flagship iPhones. And as of now, the only cheaper iPhone you can get is some of the older models, whether that being the iPhone 8, or if you want to go even cheaper, that would be the regular iPhone 7. And the problem with that is those are older devices from a different generation, which means if you were to buy those phones today, right now, there's no telling how long that's going to last, due to the hardware being a little bit older than what you would find in the newer phones these days. So that's how I feel about the iPhone SE being used in 2019. What do you guys think? Do you guys think this is still a usable device in 2019, or do you feel like it's pretty much dead and that people should stop using it right now? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys like this video, feel free to hit that thumbs up button down below. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Also check out the description below for my social media links, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody.